Over the past couple of hundred years, many of us have been shut out from poetry, and I started with nursery rhymes to get us thinking about poetry and what it is and what it does for us in the world. And Iona Opie, in her introduction to the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes, asked the question of whether nursery rhymes count as poetry. And it might seem obvious to you that if they're little pieces of verse, that sure they're little poems, but she was in the middle of this 20th century conflict of whether or not things that weren't just really high and deep and dealing with love and death and higher themes and so on. There were seriously people out there who are saying it doesn't count as poetry unless it's up at that level, and you get the sense that there's poetry and poetry, and you have this whole academic approach to things, and publishers and other people saying it doesn't count as poetry unless it's at that higher level. But Iona Opie cited W.H. Auden, who said that poetry is memorable speech, and he spent his career as a poet trying to make his poems memorable. But you'd have to say that, well, let me just ask you, how many of you know Jack and Jill? And how many of you can recite a poem by W.H. Auden? So whose poems are more memorable? The question of memorable speech is a really valid one that Iona Opie brings up. So nursery rhymes, are they poetry? And let me bring up my next note card here. Nursery rhymes have lasted for hundreds of years. Many of them, they can actually trace them back into the 1500s, 1200s, and so on. They've been around for hundreds of years. They've also crossed social classes. Rich people and poor people know them. Young people and old people know them, and so on. So let me just ask you, how many poems do you know by heart? Can you think right now how many poems you can recite just from memory? And I'll bust that open for you a little bit and ask it a different way. How many songs are there that you can sing along with when they come on the radio? How many songs can you sing along with if they come up on your iPod or you're listening to things in the car? What makes a song memorable? Songs and lyric poetry are really close cousins to each other. Some lyric poetry doesn't have a tune necessarily as much as it has a rhythm, and some songs you can actually pull them off and take the music away from them and just recite the words, and they're still pretty memorable. So I just got an example of that. So a number of years ago, John Lennon from the Beatles was interviewed about the song Hey Jude that Paul McCartney actually wrote, and he said that during the recording time that there was a line from that song Hey Jude that Paul McCartney thought, it just doesn't make sense, so I want to take it out and put something in better, and it was the phrase, the movement you need is on your shoulder. And John Lennon said to him, no, you got to leave that in. That's the best line in the song, because John Lennon was saying, what a strange image or a strange piece of language. The movement you need is on your shoulder. And over the decades, that's proved to be a very memorable line of speech. People can remember the lines from Hey Jude and sing along with that song more than they can many other poems that are out there. So what makes a poem memorable? What makes a little piece of speech? And we're talking kind of like motifs here, but we're talking about just little patches of speech where it's like they're memorable. What makes those memorable for us? So when we think about nursery rhymes, you've got to realize, well, there's a whole tradition here of songs where I have a bunch of those memorized the same way that I have some popular songs memorized, and I can recite some of them. The question for me is, how many of the most popular nursery rhymes can you recite at least the first verse for that rhyme? And so I've got a list here, and I want you to go to Blackboard or Dropbox or Google Docs, wherever I've put this for you, and print out the list and just mark the list for me. Tell me for which of these nursery rhymes can you remember at least the first 4 lines. When I say 4 lines, I'll just give you a quick go through. So Jack and Jill up there at the top of this list. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. There's your standard 4-line stanza feature for most nursery rhymes. How many of them can you just remember that first verse for? And some of them you'll remember more than one verse. Make a different mark if you can remember the first couple of lines, but you can't quite remember how the rest of it goes. And let's just page down. There is the next set. Let's pull that together. So this is about 35 to 37 of the most popular nursery rhymes, and I'd just like to know for how many of these can you remember them. We'll talk about that in class and talk about what that means for you and poetry and what you might do with these things in your classroom. All right, thanks.